Samuel Creek had saved every penny for 23 years to buy his dream farm in Montana Territory. But when he arrived to finalize the purchase in 1879, he discovered the seller dead and a young woman hanging from the rafters, a gruesome scene that would frame him for murder and uncover a deadly conspiracy of greed and corruption. As the noose tightened around his own neck, both literally and figuratively, Samuel realized his fight for the land had become a fight for his very life. But when the dust settled and the truth emerged from the darkness, would Samuel discover that some prices are worth paying, even when they cost everything he thought he wanted? Samuel Creek's boots hit the dusty ground as he jumped down from his horse, his heart beating fast like a drum in his chest. The year was 1879. And after 23 long years of working on other people's ranches in Montana Territory, he finally had enough money saved to buy his own farm. The leather bag tied to his saddle held every silver dollar he'd ever earned, enough to make Henry Whitfield's 40-acre spread his very own. The morning sun painted everything gold, and Samuel could smell the sweet grass and feel the cool October wind on his face. This wasn't just any piece of land he was buying. This was his chance to stop being a worker and become an owner. His chance to plant crops instead of just moving other people's cattle around. His chance to build something that would last long after he was gone. The Whitfield farmhouse sat quiet under some big cottonwood trees, their leaves turning yellow and orange like fire. Samuel had been here once before, 2 weeks ago, when old Henry had shaken his hand and promised to sell him the place. They'd agreed to meet right at sunrise to sign the papers and hand over the money. But something felt wrong. The house was too quiet. No smoke came from the chimney, even though the morning was cold enough to see your breath. The chickens weren't making noise in their coop. Even the old dog that usually barked at strangers was nowhere to be seen. Samuel walked up to the front porch, his spurs jingling with each step. The wooden boards creaked under his weight as he knocked on the door. "Mr. Whitfield? It's Sam Creek, here for our meeting." His voice echoed in the still air, but nobody answered back. The front door was open just a crack, moving back and forth in the breeze like it was breathing. Samuel pushed it open wider and called out again, "Hello? Anyone home?" Still nothing. Just the sound of wind whistling through the house, and something else, a creaking noise coming from inside, like an old rope under too much weight. Samuel's hand moved to the gun on his hip, without him even thinking about it. 23 years of ranch work had taught him to trust his gut when something didn't feel right. And right now, every instinct he had was screaming that he should turn around and ride away as fast as his horse could carry him. But this farm was his dream. He'd saved every penny, worked through sickness and injury, missed chances to start a family because he was so focused on this goal. He couldn't just walk away now, not when he was so close to everything he'd ever wanted. Taking a deep breath, Samuel stepped through the doorway into the dim house, not knowing that in the next few minutes, his entire life would change forever. The smell hit Samuel first, something sweet and sick that made his stomach turn. He'd smelled death before on cattle drives, but this was different. This was human death, and it filled the small farmhouse like a thick, heavy blanket that he couldn't escape. Samuel moved slowly through the front room, his eyes getting used to the dim light. Dust danced in the sunbeams coming through dirty windows, and everything looked like people had left in a hurry. Chairs were turned over, papers scattered on the floor, and a coffee cup sat half empty on the kitchen table, a thin skin forming on top of the cold liquid. Then he saw her. In the main room, hanging from a thick wooden beam that ran across the ceiling, was a young woman. The rope around her neck was tied tight, and her feet hung just inches above an overturned wooden box. Her long red hair fell around her shoulders like a waterfall, and her simple blue dress was torn at the bottom. Samuel's knees went weak, and he had to grab onto a chair to keep from falling down. He'd seen plenty of rough things in his life, men hurt in stampedes, gunfights that went bad, accidents that left good people dead. But he'd never seen anything like this. Never seen someone so young, so clearly murdered, and made to look like something else. Because that's what this was. Murder. The rope marks on her wrists showed she'd been tied up before she died. The scratches on her hands meant she'd fought back against whoever did this to her. And the way her neck was bent, Samuel had to look away and take several deep breaths to keep from being sick. What happened here? He whispered to the empty room. Where was Henry Whitfield? Had he done this terrible thing, then run away? Or was he lying dead somewhere else in the house? Another victim of whatever evil had visited this place. Samuel forced himself to step closer to the woman. She looked to be about 20 years old, with a pretty face that would have smiled and laughed if she'd lived to see another day. As he reached up to check if she might somehow still be alive, even though he knew she wasn't, his fingers brushed against something in her dress pocket. A letter. The paper was thick and expensive, sealed with red wax that showed the shape of a bird, a raven holding something in its claws. Samuel had never seen a mark like that before, but something about it made his skin crawl. The sound of horses coming fast up the road outside made Samuel freeze like a deer hearing wolves. Voices carried on the wind, men's voices, angry and getting closer by the second. Samuel shoved the letter into his boot just as the front door burst open, and Sheriff Wade Carpenter stepped inside, followed by 3 other men. Well, well, the sheriff said, looking from Samuel to the dead woman and back again. Looks like we got ourselves a killer. Sheriff Wade Carpenter's horse kicked up dust clouds as he rode toward the farmhouse with 3 other men. Samuel stepped outside with his hands up, knowing how bad this looked. A stranger alone with a dead woman was never good news in Montana territory. Well, well, what do we have here? Sheriff Carpenter climbed down from his horse slowly. His badge caught the morning sunlight. Behind him rode 3 deputies, and a man in fancy clothes who looked like he owned half the territory. The well-dressed stranger got off his horse like he was used to expensive things. His gray eyes stared at Samuel like a hawk watching a mouse. Everything about him screamed money and power. Found her hanging inside, Samuel said, trying to keep his voice steady. His heart was beating so fast, he thought everyone could hear it. Been dead a while by the look of it. Where's Henry Whitfield? We had business to conduct this morning. The fancy man stepped forward and took off his black hat. His hair was silver and perfectly combed. Henry Whitfield died 3 days ago. Natural causes, they say. I'm Judge Preston Maverick, and I handle his property now. His voice got cold as winter ice. And that woman inside is my daughter, Catherine. Samuel felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. The letter in his boot seemed to burn against his leg. This was getting worse by the minute. I'm sorry for your loss, Judge. But I just got here this morning. I came to buy this property from Mr. Whitfield with money I saved for 23 years. Deputy Ross Murray laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Sure you did. Drifter shows up, finds the judge's daughter dead, claims he's innocent. We've heard that story before, haven't we, boys? The other deputies nodded and moved their hands closer to their guns. Samuel counted 4 against 1. Not good odds, especially when one of them was a judge who could hang him legally. But Judge Maverick held up his hand. He studied Samuel like he was trying to solve a puzzle. What did you say your name was, son? Samuel Creek. Been working the Double Bar Ranch for 15 years. Saved every penny to buy this place. Samuel's voice cracked a little. All his dreams were falling apart. Ask anyone in town. They know I'm honest. The judge looked at Sheriff Carpenter. Something passed between them without words. Something that made Samuel's skin crawl like spiders were walking on him. Whatever game these men were playing, Samuel was pretty sure he wouldn't like the rules. Search him, Judge Maverick ordered. Then lock him up. We'll sort this out proper-like. As the deputies moved toward him, Samuel thought about running. But where could he go? They had horses, guns, and the law on their side. He had nothing but the truth. And in 1879 Montana territory, truth didn't always matter as much as power. The rope around Catherine's neck wasn't the only noose tightening that day. The jail cell smelled like old sweat and broken dreams. Samuel sat on the hard cot, turning the letter over in his hands. He'd managed to hide it in his boot when they searched him. The red wax seal showed a black bird holding something in its claws. "You didn't kill her." A woman's voice made him jump. She stood in the shadows outside his cell. Her dark hair was pulled back tight, and her dress looked expensive, but not showy. "My name is Dr. Victoria Hayes." I looked at Catherine's body. Samuel stood up and walked to the bars. "You're a doctor? A woman doctor?" "Medical school in Philadelphia. Graduated in 1876. One of only 12 women in my class." Her voice was proud but tired. Catherine Maverick didn't die from hanging. Someone strangled her first, then hung her up to make it look different. The marks on her neck tell the real story. Hope started growing in Samuel's chest, like a small flame. "Why are you telling me this? Why help someone you don't know?" Dr. Hayes stepped into the lamplight. Samuel could see she was determined about something. "Because I knew Catherine. She came to see me 2 weeks ago. She was scared about something she'd found out about her father's business. Said it could destroy him if people knew. She wanted to leave Montana Territory and never come back." Samuel pulled the letter from his boot and held it up. "Found this on her. You know what this bird symbol means?" Dr. Hayes's eyes got big. "The Blackwater Company. They buy land for mining, sometimes in ways that aren't exactly legal. If Catherine had proof that her father was working with them." She didn't finish, but Samuel understood. "So, I'm not just being blamed for murder," Samuel said. "I'm being blamed to hide something bigger, much bigger." And Samuel Creek, "If we don't prove you're innocent and show everyone the truth, you'll hang for something you didn't do. Meanwhile, the real killers will go free and keep hurting people." Outside, Samuel could hear men talking and horses moving around. Sheriff Carpenter was probably getting ready for the trial. In small towns like this, trials happened fast. Sometimes too fast for the truth to catch up. "How do we prove anything from inside a jail cell?" Samuel asked. Dr. Hayes smiled for the first time. "Leave that to me. I have an idea, but it's dangerous. If we get caught, we'll both end up dead. But if we don't try, you'll hang anyway. Are you willing to trust a woman you just met?" Samuel looked at her determined face and thought about Catherine hanging in that farmhouse. Someone had killed an innocent woman to keep secrets. Someone powerful enough to make judges and sheriffs look the other way. "Doc, at this point, you're the only friend I've got. What's your plan?" But before she could answer, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Someone was coming, and from the sound of it, they weren't bringing good news. The rope burned Samuel's wrists as Deputy Murray dragged him toward the old mine shaft 3 miles outside town. Dr. Victoria Hayes rode beside them, her hands tied behind her back, her medical bag lost somewhere in the darkness behind them. The moon hung like a silver coin in the October sky of 1879, casting strange shadows across the rocky ground. "You should have minded your own business, Creek," Murray growled, his horse snorting in the cold air. "Judge Maverick don't like folks poking around where they don't belong." Samuel tested the ropes around his wrists. The knots were tight, but not impossible. Years of working cattle had taught him a thing or two about getting free when you needed to. Funny thing about murder, deputy, it has a way of coming to light eventually. Victoria caught his eye and nodded toward the mine entrance ahead. Something glinted in the moonlight near the wooden supports metal. Maybe tools left behind by the miners who had abandoned this place years ago. If they could reach those tools, they might have a chance. The mine shaft yawned before them, like the mouth of some sleeping giant. Murray dismounted and pulled out his pistol, checking the chambers with the careful movements of a man who had done this before. "Judge says, you two found something you shouldn't have. Says Catherine was always too smart for her own good. What happened to her, Murray?" Victoria's voice carried the authority of someone used to getting answers. "What really happened to Catherine Maverick?" For just a moment, Murray's face softened. She was a good girl, always bringing medicine to the mining families. Always asking too many questions about why so many folks were getting sick. He shook his head. But she found out about the silver deposits under the Whitfield land. Found out about the deals her daddy was making with the Blackwater Company. Samuel felt something cold settle in his stomach. She threatened to expose him. Threatened to ruin everything. All that money, all those plans gone because one girl couldn't keep her mouth shut. Murray's voice grew harder. Judge tried to reason with her. Tried to make her understand that sometimes you got to sacrifice a few for the good of many. The wind picked up, howling through the mine's supports with a sound like crying. Victoria shivered, but her voice remained steady. So he killed his own daughter. He didn't have a choice. Murray's shout echoed off the rocks. You think this territory builds itself? You think civilization comes free? Sometimes good people have to do bad things for the greater good. Samuel saw his chance. While Murray was focused on Victoria, he worked one hand free from the loosened rope. The deputy's back was turned, his attention split between his prisoners and his own guilt. Samuel lunged forward, grabbing for the gun. They hit the ground hard, rolling in the dirt and loose rocks. The pistol went off, the bullet sparking off stone somewhere in the darkness. Murray was younger and heavier, but Samuel had the desperation of a man fighting for his life. They grappled for control of the weapon, their breathing harsh in the thin mountain air. Victoria worked frantically at her own ropes, using the distraction to free herself. She could see more riders approaching in the distance, torchlight flickering between the trees. Judge Maverick was coming, and he was bringing help. The gun went off again, closer this time. Murray cried out and rolled away, clutching his shoulder. Samuel staggered to his feet, the pistol in his hand, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Blood seeped through Murray's fingers, dark in the moonlight. The mine, Victoria gasped, finally working free of her ropes. Samuel, there's something in the mine Catherine wanted us to find, something worth killing for. The sound of approaching horses grew louder. Shouts echoed across the rocky landscape as Judge Maverick's men spread out to surround them. Samuel looked at the dark mouth of the mine shaft, then at Victoria's determined face. Looks like we're going underground, he said. Inside the abandoned mine, darkness pressed against them like a living thing. Samuel struck a match, the tiny flame dancing in the stale air and revealing timber supports that creaked with age. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, each drop echoing like a countdown to disaster. Catherine's letter mentioned the third support beam, Victoria whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of their own breathing. She said she hid proof there, evidence that would destroy her father's plans. Behind them, torchlight flickered at the mine entrance. Judge Maverick's voice boomed through the tunnels, calm and controlled despite the chaos above ground. Mr. Creek, Dr. Hayes, you're only making this harder on yourselves. Come out now, and I promise you a quick end. Samuel's match burned down to his fingers, and he lit another. The weak light revealed a narrow passage leading deeper into the mountain, but also something else, scratches in the wooden beam, marks that looked deliberate. Here, he breathed. Someone carved something into the wood. Victoria ran her fingers over the marks, feeling the pattern Catherine had left behind. Numbers, carved deep enough to survive years of moisture and decay. It's a combination, but for what? The torchlight behind them grew brighter. Footsteps echoed through the tunnel, careful but determined. Judge Maverick wasn't alone. Samuel could hear at least 3 sets of boots, maybe more. They had minutes before being trapped in this passage with nowhere to run. There, Victoria pointed to a metal box, wedged behind the support beam, nearly invisible in the shadows. That's what she was protecting. Samuel pried the box free, while Victoria worked on the combination lock, her medical training helping her feel for the tiny clicks of the mechanism. The footsteps were getting closer, and she could hear Judge Maverick directing his men to spread out through the tunnel system. The lock clicked open, just as the first torch rounded the corner behind them. Inside the box, wrapped in oiled leather, were documents that made Samuel's blood run cold even in the flickering matchlight. Mining surveys showing silver veins worth millions, running directly under every farm in the valley. Letters between Judge Maverick and Blackwater Company officials. And most damning of all, a list of property owners who had died under mysterious circumstances after refusing to sell their land. Sweet Mary, Samuel breathed. Henry Whitfield wasn't the first. Victoria's face was grim in the dying matchlight. 12 families over the past 2 years. All natural deaths, according to the official records. All standing in the way of the mining operation. She pointed to a name at the bottom of the list. Look at this. Thomas Brennan died of fever last month, but I treated him just 2 weeks before his death. He was healthy as a horse. Moving targets make poor conversation partners. Judge Maverick's voice cut through the darkness. Much closer now. Step into the light, both of you. Slowly. They had no choice. Samuel tucked the documents inside his shirt and helped Victoria to her feet. They emerged from behind the support beam to find Judge Maverick waiting with 2 deputies, their guns drawn and steady. The judge looked older in the torchlight, his silver hair disheveled and his expensive clothes torn from the chase. My daughter always was too clever for her own good, he said sadly. Even as a child, she asked too many questions, saw too much. I hoped she would understand eventually, see the bigger picture. The bigger picture? Victoria's voice shook with rage. You murdered 12 innocent people for money. I built a future. Maverick's composure cracked for the first time. This territory was nothing but dirt and dreams before men like me brought civilization to it. Do you think progress comes free? Do you think prosperity happens by accident? Samuel stepped forward, his hand still resting on the papers inside his shirt. What happens when folks in town learn the truth? When they find out their beloved judge is nothing but a killer in fancy clothes? Judge Maverick smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Who's going to tell them? You two will die in this mine collapse, just like poor Catherine died by her own hand. Tragic accidents. Nothing more. The deputies moved closer, their weapons trained on Samuel and Victoria. But as they did, a new sound echoed through the tunnels, the rumble of unstable rock shifting overhead. The mine had been abandoned for good reason, and too many people moving through its passages was waking up dangers that had been sleeping for years. Judge, one of the deputies said nervously, maybe we should. His words were cut off by a grinding roar as part of the tunnel ceiling gave way. Rocks crashed down between them, separating the group and filling the air with choking dust. In the chaos, Samuel grabbed Victoria's hand and pulled her toward a side passage he had spotted earlier. They ran blindly through the darkness, the sound of the mine's death throes echoing all around them. Behind them, they could hear shouts and curses as Judge Maverick and his men tried to navigate the collapsing tunnels. But ahead, Samuel could swear he saw something that made his heart leap with hope, a faint glimmer of daylight filtering down from above. The mine tunnel shook like an angry giant as rocks crashed down behind them. Samuel grabbed Victoria's hand and pulled her toward a tiny crack of light ahead. His shirt was torn and bloody, but he kept moving because stopping meant dying. Can you see daylight? Victoria gasped, her medical bag bouncing against her hip as they climbed over fallen stones. Maybe. Hard to tell if it's real or just my mind playing tricks. Samuel's voice echoed off the narrow walls. They squeezed through spaces barely wide enough for their bodies, following that precious hint of light. When they finally crawled out of a hidden cave opening, the morning sun hit them like a blessing. Victoria immediately started cleaning Samuel's wounds with water from her bag while he watched the valley below. Something was wrong. Too many riders moving back and forth near town. Too much activity for a normal day. They're already spreading lies about us, Samuel said, pointing to the dust clouds in the distance. Bet they're telling folks we killed the judge and died in that mine collapse. Victoria tied off his bandage and smiled the first real smile he'd seen from her. That's where you're wrong, Samuel Creek. Yesterday, before I helped you escape, I sent a message to my friends back east. Important people who've been watching what happens in places like this. Samuel stared at her. What kind of important people? The kind who work for the government in Washington. The kind who don't like it when judges and mining companies murder innocent folks. She stood up and brushed dirt off her dress. They'll be here on the noon train today. Hope flickered in Samuel's chest like a small flame. You really think they can help us? I think Judge Maverick's friends are about to learn what real justice looks like. Victoria looked toward the town where smoke was rising from several chimneys. But first, we need to stay alive long enough for help to arrive. A gunshot rang out from somewhere below them. Then another. Men on horseback were spreading out across the valley, searching every building, every hiding spot. Deputy Murray had probably convinced them that Samuel and Victoria were dangerous killers who needed to be stopped at any cost. We can't stay here, Samuel said. They'll find us soon enough. Victoria opened her medical bag and pulled out a small telescope. My father gave me this when I left for medical school. Said a doctor needs to see clearly. She studied the town through the lens. There's a freight train stopped at the station. If we could reach it, that's half a mile of open ground with no cover. Sometimes the only choice is between certain death and possible survival. Victoria collapsed the telescope and met his eyes. Besides, I didn't come this far to give up now. Samuel looked at this remarkable woman who'd risked everything to help a stranger find justice. She was right. They'd come too far to quit. The truth about Catherine's murder, about Judge Maverick's crimes, about the Blackwater Company's reign of terror, all of it had to reach the right people. All right, Doc. Let's go catch ourselves a train. 6 months had passed since that terrible day at the mine, and Samuel barely recognized his own property. The farmhouse gleamed with fresh white paint, and the barn had been converted into something he'd never imagined. A real medical clinic, with clean beds and proper equipment. Victoria emerged from the clinic, wiping her hands after delivering the Peterson family's new baby. That makes 12 births this month, she said, settling beside Samuel on the front porch. Word spreading that we're here to help folks, not hurt them. Samuel nodded, looking out over fields where green shoots of corn and wheat swayed in the spring breeze. His hands, once smooth from handling only reins and ropes, now showed the honest dirt of a working farmer. Land's producing better than I ever dreamed. Turns out soil grows food a lot better than it hides silver. A young rider approached from town Jimmy Walsh, who worked for the new territorial marshal. The boy's face was bright with excitement as he dismounted near their gate. Mr. Creek, Dr. Hayes, got news from the marshal, and a special delivery too. Jimmy handed Victoria an official envelope with fancy seals. They sentenced the last of those Blackwater criminals this morning. 20 years of hard work in prison for every one of them. Victoria opened the envelope carefully, her eyes growing wide as she read. Samuel leaned over to see what had captured her attention so completely. They're giving us the mineral rights, Victoria whispered. All that silver under our land, the government says it belongs to us now. We can dig it up and sell it if we want. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, thinking about Catherine Maverick and her father's greed. He thought about Henry Whitfield, who'd wanted to protect this land from people who saw only money when they looked at beautiful places. He thought about all the families who'd been murdered or driven away by folks who believed silver was worth more than human lives. You know what I'm thinking, Doc. Victoria smiled, already knowing his answer. That we leave it right where nature put it? Catherine died trying to keep this land safe from people who wanted to tear it apart for profit. Maybe the best way to honor her memory is by letting it stay the way God intended. Samuel stood up and walked to the porch railing, looking out over the peaceful valley. We got everything we need right here. Good soil, clean water, and work that helps people instead of hurting them. Children's laughter drifted across the yard where several young patients played while their mothers received care from Victoria. The sound filled Samuel with a contentment he'd never known during all those years of dreaming about owning land. Besides, Samuel added with a grin, I've learned something important these past months. The best dreams aren't the ones you plan for years. They're the ones that surprise you when you're busy doing the right thing. As the sun set over Montana Territory in the spring of 1880, Samuel Creek realized he'd found something far more valuable than the farm he'd saved 23 years to buy. He'd found a purpose, a partner, and a place where justice had won over greed. The farmhouse settled into evening quiet, but it hummed with life and hope, proof that sometimes the most important treasures are the ones you discover while fighting for someone else's freedom.